This is just a quick video reaction to a clip I saw of self-professed Byzantine Catholic YouTuber Matt Fradd's recent interview with one Jason Evert. I had not heard of Evert before. Evidently, he spun out of the penumbra surrounding JPII's theology of the body, specifically out of the array of popularizers, chief among whom is Christopher West. Additionally, although I've watched a handful of Fradd's videos, I don't know much about him either. In the interest of full disclosure, I haven't seen the entire several hours long interview, but only the 7-minute excerpt dated October 23, 2024, entitled Responding to JPII's Heresy Accusations. With that much out of the way, I wanted to begin by answering the question, why am I commenting on this at all? Because I don't want this video to be, and I am not presently well equipped to make, any sort of deep dive into the spectrum of relevant issues that it raises, or I should say that it skirts. This is basically a lamentation. I'll give 4 reasons for that. Number 1, the underlying issue is vital. After all, if a credible case can be made that a pope, or to put it more neutrally, that a person who claims to be or is considered to be a pope, if you can coherently argue that such a papal claimant is a heretic, then that has tremendous consequences. This ought to be too obvious to have to elaborate on, and there should be a lot of serious discussion of this. Another reason that I'm commenting, beyond the issue's inherent importance, is number 2, that I'm unsatisfied with the state of the debate, insofar as there is any recognizable debate per se at all. And this dissatisfaction is because, number 3, I do think there is something to debate. That is, and unfortunately, I do think there's a prima facie case that serious theological concerns can be raised, both about the Second Vatican Council and, more pertinently for this video, about the ostensible popes associated with it, from John the 23rd, who convoked the gathering, all the way to Francis, the current supposed pontiff. The final and main reason I'll give off the top of my head, number 4, is that I'm disappointed with Matt Fradd personally. Specifically, in the video, he and Evert field what appears to be a viewer-submitted question about how Catholics can or should reconcile JPII's canonization, quote-unquote, with JPII's actions, such as his hosting of the infamous World Day of Prayer for Peace in Assisi, Italy on October 27, 1986, or his kissing of a copy of the Muslim holy book, the Quran, May 14, 1999. Let me say emphatically that I don't want to be misunderstood as saying that I think these 2 examples are the strongest or clearest examples of alleged apostasy or heresy. In this video, I'm simply not taking a position on that question either way. Rather, I'm merely framing this video as a reaction to the video that Evert and Fradd made. And those are the examples they mention. Those are the examples that come up in that video. After defining heresy as an obstinate post-baptismal denial of any divine and Catholic truth, Evert dismissively asks, where'd he do that, you know? You don't see that in the life of John Paul. That's just throwing words. Apostasy, heresy. It's like, okay, these words mean something, and so, if you want to sling them, you'd better prepare to offer some evidence in support of that, end quote. And then the rest of the short clip proceeds on the basis of these 2 assumptions. Number 1, that JPII's actions might conceivably have been, quote, bad optics for the Church, or even regrettable indiscretions. Popes aren't perfect, after all. But number 2, no one can seriously sustain charges of apostasy or heresy against JPII from the written record when, we might suppose, that record is subjected to withering scholarly scrutiny. Unfortunately, no such scrutiny is modeled in this video, and this is somewhat extraordinary. To explain why I say so, I'll take you back to the reason I'm aware of Mr. Fradd at all. In a video dated September 20th, 2022, the Pints With Aquinas channel hosted a sedevacantism debate between Jeff Kassman and Peter Dimond on the question, are John the 23rd through Francis true popes? I've been following the work of brothers Peter and Michael Dimond and their Most Holy Family Monastery for many years. I found Fradd because of the debate with Kassman. And what made me like and subscribe, as they say, is what I perceive to be Fradd's intellectual honesty. As viewers of his channel may recall, in a video dated October 3rd, 2022, entitled Why I'm Not Taking Down the Sedevacantism Debate, Fradd began, after casual preliminaries, by saying, quote, I don't mean any disrespect to Kassman. who tried to defend the position that there have been valid popes since John the 23rd, but I do think the general consensus was that Brother Dimond won the debate, end quote. Fradd proceeded to lament that his guy lost and labeled the entire debate scandalous, but he still insisted that he would leave the video up, which I found admirable. Now, admittedly, I didn't review the raw footage of that debate for this piece, but my recollection basically comports with some of the high-ranked comments, and I will gesture toward a few of them. As to the idea that the debate was, quote, scandalous, part of that surely stems from exchanges, such as when Dimond pointedly asked Cassman if he, Cassman, believed that Francis professed the true faith. Cassman's non-answer prompted one viewer to remark, "Imagine as a Catholic being asked if the Pope professes the true faith, and you can't answer." As a quick and dirty summary of the debate, then, you might say, both Cassman and Dimond had grave doubts that Francis professed the Catholic faith. The only real question was whether that failure would disqualify Francis from being a true pope. Think about that for a second. Matt Fradd, regardless of the extent to which he agreed with either participant, hosted a debate where the central issue was, given that Francis may be a heretic, can he still be the pope? Now, I don't want to press this too hard, especially since the current topic is JP2, not Francis, but the pitiful state of affairs didn't go unnoticed for some of the Vatican II boosters in Fradd's audience, one of whom, on Reddit, called Fradd imprudent for agreeing to host the debate in the first place. Despite his ultimately poor showing, the evidently SSPX-connected Cassman probably deserves some credit for at least being willing to discuss these questions at all. Novus Ordos, by contrast, whether lay apologists or what have you, have heretofore ducked any such direct contest. Given this scandalous element of the debate, and by the way, the comment referred to shows up on my end as top rated with some 1,300 likes, but given the tenor of the debate, it's clear that by the time you get to Francis historically, many professing Catholics have found themselves entertaining grave doubts about the orthodoxy of the papal claimant. In other words, Francis is suspect in a lot of minds. Now, by itself, that doesn't immediately force a conclusion like that JP2 was a heretic, but it does mean that at some point in time, it starts to look like error has crept into the church, seating itself at the highest levels of decision-making. Are we to think that everything was hunky-dory until March 13, 2013? If not, JP2's pontificate, if legitimate, which was the second longest in the history of the Church, seems like a pretty good place to look for recent wrong turns. And in that vein, it's well to remember that Jorge Bergoglio's promotions, first to the role of bishop and then to cardinal, were both due to JP2. In other words, without JP2, there wouldn't be a Francis. This raises questions like, why did JP2 promote Francis? How much did the former know about the latter? Etc. Minimally, surely, these facts imply, or ought to imply, that JP2 was both familiar with Bergoglio's theology and that, to some extent, he approved of it. Now, of course, without looking into details, one might doubt that Bergoglio's theology was advanced or articulated enough in the 1990s to give JP2 sufficient material on which to base such judgments. But on the face of it, it seems incredible, that is, not credible, that there were no hints of the kind of aberrations that would, under Francis's alleged pontificate, provoke a significant subset of Catholic and other observers to worry about the man's orthodoxy. At least it suggests that the current processes for evaluating and elevating priests to bishops isn't sufficiently rigorous or scrutinous. But once again, even if Francis's unorthodox tendencies are established conclusively, these do not automatically impugn JP2. Agreed. All I'm saying is that entertaining doubts about the legitimacy or orthodoxy of recent papal claimants is nothing outlandish or unheard of. So when such doubts do arise, whether about Francis or JP2, I for one would hope that they'd be handled with a depth that's simply not present in this video. And that fact, beyond being disappointing, is also hard to explain. That is, if we credit Matt Fradd with being of goodwill and possessed of a functional memory. Because Fradd has literally had dealings with a man, Brother Peter Dimond, who has, for all intents and purposes, done exactly what Evert challenges JP2 naysayers to do. Namely, Dimond has shown himself well prepared to, quote, offer evidence in support of the allegations of apostasy and heresy in the upper echelons of the supposed Catholic hierarchy. As any sincere visitor to VaticanCatholic.com should know, this includes excavation and analysis of JP2's writings, along with those of other papal claimants, including, without limitation, Benedict XVI and Francis. But Fradd implies that he's wholly unaware of Dimond's efforts. He concludes the segment by arguing as follows, quote, "If you want to accuse the Holy Father, St. John Paul II, of syncretism, if you want to say that that visual of the interfaith prayer meeting in Assisi gave the impression, let's say, that Buddhism is a legitimate path to God, or that the Muslim doesn't need Christ, if that's your accusation, then you should be able to find it in his, that is, JP2's, writings. Since you cannot find that in his writings, a more charitable view may be a better take," end quote. At which point Evert chimed in by saying, yeah, and he, still referring to JP2, was crystal clear in his teachings and did not compromise the truth of the faith, end quote. And that's all she wrote for the Evert-Fradd defense of JP2. It ends at 5 minutes 42 seconds of the 7-minute 13-second clip. Despite this professed ignorance, Peter Dimond's organization has multiple resources in which he and his collaborator, Michael Dimond, make the case against JP2. The very case that Evert and Fradd imply has never been made, or more strongly, that they insinuate cannot be made. Specifically, the Dimonds combed through JP2's addresses, encyclicals, and his edition of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and they lodge numerous allegations at JP2. Now, my point is not that these allegations are ipso facto conclusive, nor am I saying that there is no available counterargument. Frankly, it would be nice, quote-unquote, if the Dimonds were wrong. But this cannot be established by wishing really hard, and to say or imply that there is no written case against JP2, or that the strongest objection against his, quote, sainthood is an unflattering or indiscreet photo, simply isn't a serious argument. Fradd's implied ignorance, whether because he is unaware of the Dimonds' work in toto, or because he simply refuses to discuss it, is quite honestly inexcusable. To invoke a term from Catholic moral philosophy, Fradd's ignorance is, of course, vincible. This is to say that he should be able to overcome it. He shouldn't be ignorant. After all, he and Evert are purporting to address these questions, if not with authority, then at least with confidence, and in a way that they presumably expect will be helpful or convincing to their audience. But if you were to run into the Dimonds' arguments and give them a fair hearing, this video from Fradd and Evert is unlikely to appear to be anything more than pathetic. If there are devastating counterarguments against the Dimonds, then let's hear what they are. But even more than this, the silence is, if not inexplicable, certainly hard to square with Fradd's entire library of videos, because he's literally had dealings with the Dimonds before. Presumably, Fradd's unspoken rationale is that he doesn't want to direct his audience to resources like those from Michael and Peter Dimond that he personally disapproves of. But then, if Fradd isn't ignorant, strictly so-called, neglecting the Dimonds' work because of personal distaste seems uncharitable. And this is ultimately why I opened by expressing my dissatisfaction with the state of the debate. Fradd's own past experience hosting Castman and Dimond had to have impressed him with the minimal fact that a non-negligible subpopulation of Catholics, even within his own viewership, thinks that questions about the orthodoxy of various papal claimants is serious enough to debate. And out of those people, as the reception of Fradd's video ought to have sufficed to show, a sizable percentage of the audience thought Peter Dimond's case was not just compelling, but victorious. And yet, Fradd evidently decided to leave all that to the side and approach this viewer's question on this occasion on the basis of the demonstrably false premise that the only case against JP2 is superficial and not grounded in the documentary record. And I think that is very misleading. Let me end with this. Regarding JP2's kissing of the Quran, one of the 2 or 3 alleged instances of JP2's apostasy/heresy that they bother to acknowledge, admittedly prompted in this respect by the submitted query, regarding the Quran kissing, Evert confesses, quote, "I've never heard a good explanation of it. Given that JP2 is alleged to have attained to sainthood and to the status of the Great, shouldn't his character be entirely beyond reproach? Insofar as there are any lingering questions, like why did JP2 kiss a Quran, doesn't that tend to call into question the thoroughness of the canonization process? And in that regard, it's quite interesting to note that for many years, the Catholic Church employed a devil's advocate to argue against a proposed canonization. The point, one assumes, was to ensure that the Church's final verdict wasn't compromised by fanaticism. In that regard, it's quite telling to note that the position of devil's advocate was apparently abolished by John Paul II in 1983 as part of his streamlining of the whole canonization process. That's reasonable to suspect that without JP2's evident abolishment or reduction of the Church's capacity and obligation to grapple with canonization counterarguments, we wouldn't have to wonder about the explanation of JP2's Quran kissing and other such activities. For the details, see the Dimonds. We would only need to consult the Church's report on the proceedings of his canonization, and there we would presumably read the defense mounted against the devil's advocate. In other words, the devil's advocate would have argued against JP2's canonization by bringing up things like the Assisi prayer meeting and the Quran kissing, and they would have had to have been rebutted before the canonization would proceed. As things stand, there's no such insight, because no serious counterargument was ever made, and by extension, no significant defense was ever given. Too bad for us, I guess.